Hello and welcome to Pock and Rob. From time to time on this channel I go back and revisit a subject that I've covered before, and in this case I'm going to be revisiting my albums of the 1990s. Now this is part of a series that opened the channel. I did the 80s first, I did the decades kind of out of order. But when I came to the 90s, I said that I'd found that a really difficult list to compile, and out of all of the lists I did, was probably going to be the one that would see the most change, and that is most definitely the case. I'm now going to rank 50 albums. Before I go into that, I remind you to subscribe if you've not already done so, to hit the thumbs up to like and the bell to receive notifications of future content. But at number 50, I have placed Us by Peter Gabriel. This is the follow-up to So. It is not as good as So, but it does contain great tracks like Digging in the Dirt and Steam and Kiss That Frog and Only Us and Washing of the Water. And it's an album that is quite deep, but I struggle with sometimes. I think it's too long. You're going to hear that phrase too long used often. Number 50, Us by Peter Gabriel. Number 49, an album I recently reacquired from a charity shop. It's Word Gets Around by the Stereophonics. Now I saw the Stereophonics live at the V Festival in '98, but this is the one with Traffic and Local Boy in the Photograph and 1,000 Trees, which I think is one of the very best indie songs of the 90s. And I've enjoyed getting reacquainted with Word Gets Around. My number 49. At number 48, an album I struggle with. And I'm going to see this band live in June. This album, for me, is massively overshadowed by one song. This is Dookie by Green Day, and that song is, of course, Basket Case. Basket Case is a top 30 song of all time for me. The rest of the album, as a result, has failed to really grab me in the way that other Green Day albums, because I just want more Basket Case. Dookie, my number 48. At number 47, Squeeze, Some Fantastic Place. I think in my Squeeze ranking, I actually put this as probably the third best Squeeze album. This is the one where Pete Thomas joins them on the drums. Paul Carrack comes back for a second stint. This was probably the commercial peak of that resurgence period, with tracks like Third Rail and the sublime title track. It's a good album. I think it suffers for me personally from a lot of things in the 90s when I was at university I overplayed. Some Fantastic Place is an example of an overplayed album for me. If I hadn't sucked too much of the sugar out of it, it probably would be way higher. Some Fantastic Place at 47. 46 is an album that surprised me recently. I did a video on here of my top 15 disappointments, and I included Very by the Pet Shop Boys. I decided to give it another go, and whilst it is still not top draw Pet Shop Boys for me, I realised that I slagged off on that. I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing, and the version that was on there, I don't know why, because actually it's not as bad as I thought. I do massively still prefer the remixed single version, but Very has started to grow. I've started to see quite a lot of enjoyment in that as I've listened to more and more Pet Shop Boys of late. And as a result, Very, whilst it was still a disappointment, has grown, and I really quite like a lot of what's on Very now. I put it at number 46. Number 45, a lot of people have this way higher, but I'll explain why I don't in a moment. Parklife by Blur from 1994 is an album that suffers from something that almost every Blur album has, with the exception of The Ballad of Darren that came out last year, and that is some faintly irritating tracks. And I could, sorry Alex James, I could easily do without Far Out. I can't remember anything about The Debt Collector. Jubilee gets on my wick. But it's counterbalanced by Park Life and To the End and This Is a Low and so many other really great tracks on here. As a result, Park Life is a mixed bag, despite the fact that many say it's Blur's greatest. I definitely disagree on that. Park Life at 45. At number 44 is an album that suffers from the same issues that I've got with Some Fantastic Place of overplaying. It's Woodface by Crowded House. I really like Crowded House's music, and I really like every single track on Woodface, but some of the sugar's been sucked out of it from listening to it way too much in those early 90s. But you can't argue with an album with the tunes of Weather With You and Fall at Your Feet and 4 Seasons in One Day. Chocolate Cake, a little bit irritating, but Woodface, my number 44. At number 43, we're still in, I think I played it too much territory, for 0898 by The Beautiful South. But Domino Man is fantastic. Old Red Eyes is back. I didn't like it when it first came out, and I thought it was pedestrian for years and years, but it has so become a massive favourite on this. Unlike We Are Each Other, which has gone the other way. I liked it, loved it to begin with, and it's gone the other way. Bell Bottom Tear, which is really quite affecting. If it has a flaw, and it does, it's things like 36D. Dropping that from the record, I think, would have been a better answer. But it's a good record. 0898 by The Beautiful South. Number 42, for me the peak of Squeeze's second period, Play. I think I said this was the second best Squeeze album in my opinion. Play is just great songwriting throughout. I love the presentation of the CD. It's written as a play, like Waiting for Godot, which is a great conceit. It's where they concealed the lyrics within a play. So many good songs on here. The lead track was Sunday Street, which is all right. Actually, it's pretty good. The follow-up single was Satisfied, which is one of the weaker tracks on here. But House of Love and The Truth are terrific. Wicked and Cruel, Gone to the Dogs, and there's so many. There is a Voice. There is so many really strong songs on here. And to round off this batch of 10, at number 41, it's the self-titled album by Martin Joseph. So Martin Joseph emerged in the 80s as a Christian artist. He signed with a major label of Sony in the 90s. He released an album called Being There, which is a bit drippy, but it does contain Dolphins Make Me Cry, which is also a bit drippy. It got terrible reviews in the music press that I read, which is Q Magazine. But the follow-up, the second album, Martin Joseph, was stripped back a bit more. There was greater emphasis on the songwriting, and of all the Martin Joseph albums, it's probably the one that I keep coming back to the most. So for things like Cardiff Bay and Let's Talk About It in the Morning and Between the Raindrops and Gift Me, which is a track that I've played in a gig, and I think it's a really, really strong album that doesn't get the credit it deserves and didn't get the sales it deserved. Martin Joseph, number 41. Into the 40s, and at number 40, Mock Tudor by Richard Thompson. So Cook's Ferry Queen, Bathsheba Smiles are both on here. Walking the Long Miles Home. It's absolutely a favourite of Richard Thompson's tracks for me. And then right in the centre of the record, Dry My Tears and Move On. I really like Mock Tudor. My number 40. At number 39, an album that doesn't appear on a lot of these lists, but every time I listen to it, this is a late 90s album, it's late era Britpop, it's The It Girl by Sleeper, and every time I listen to it, I'm reminded of how much of a good time I'm having. With Statuesque, and What Do I Do Now, and Nice Guy Eddie, Click Off Gone, that concludes the record. It's best thing Sleeper ever did, for me. The It Girl, my number 39. At number 38, Modern Life is Rubbish. I think it's a better record than Park Life. It's just it's a record that I perhaps don't know as well as Parklife, and that is probably why it goes higher in the list. So Chemical World is on this, and For Tomorrow, Colin's Zeal, and Miss America and Oily Water. I think I included this in my sophomore album rankings, and rightly so. Modern Life is Rubbish was a huge step up from Leisure. Commercially, a bit of a step down, but it set the template that will become Parklife and Britpop. I really do like Modern Life is Rubbish. And number 37 is a bit of a left field choice that wouldn't get onto a lot of these lists. This is the Juliet Letters by Elvis Costello and the Brodsky Quartet. This is some absolutely fantastic songwriting craft and a terrific collaboration with Elvis Costello and a chamber quartet that for some people doesn't work. I'm not one of those people. I think it really works fantastically well on this record. The Juliet Letters is just a really good cohesive whole of an album. Birds Will Still Be Singing, Swine, Dear Sweet Filthy World, This Offer Is Unrepeatable, I Almost Had a Weakness, Mac Jackson's Monk and Row. There's great songwriting to be found on this record. Juliet Letters, my number 37. Number 36, another album that I don't put on often, but when I do, I end up with a really good time. This is great pop music. Jollification by the Lightning Seeds. So this has got several hit singles on it like Perfect and Change, Marvelous and Lucky You, absolutely great song. Features Terry Hall on Feeling Lazy and Alison Moyet on My Best Day. Jollification by the Lightning Seeds at number 36. Number 35, and one of the things that prompted not just me revisiting this list, but revisiting my revisiting of this list ready for the video, because I listened to this at the weekend. High on the Happy Side by Wet Wet Wet. So another album from 1991 and 92 era, that kind of thing as I was heading to university. It contains their sole UK number one hit that was written by them, Goodnight Girl. But we've also got Lip Service and More Than This and Leave a Light On, Celebration, the title track, High on the Happy Side, and a brand new Sunrise, which is absolutely fantastic. And 2 Days After Midnight. Every time I put it on, it's another one of those albums that reminds me when I first heard it, which was on a cassette in my friend's car. High on the Happy Side by Wet 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 is my number 35. 34 is another album that prompted this re-ranking because I did own it in the 90s. I barely listened to it. I got rid of my CD copy. Then I got back into this band in a big way in the last 3 or 4 years. It's a double. And Use Your Illusion 2 by Guns N' Roses. So this is... I'll say more about this a little bit later on, because if you watch my double albums video, you'll know that and it's no spoiler really, that Use Your Illusion 1 is an album that I think is better. If you don't know the story, they released Use Your Illusion 1, a double, and Use Your Illusion 2, another double, all on the same day. This was the one that got to number 1, and most people cite as better, and I respectfully disagree. While I will say things like You Could Be Mine and Civil War and Yesterday's are great stuff, and Get in the Ring, one of the angriest songs in the world, this also contains My World, which is really bad. And Knocking on Heaven's Door, which, whilst was a hit single, is one of my least favourite Guns N' Roses tracks, and actually it's one of my least favourite Bob Dylan tracks. I do not enjoy or rate Knocking on Heaven's Door. And as a result, this album, this one that everybody thinks is better, I really disagree. Use Your Illusion 2 is my number 34. Number 33, an album that I got reacquainted with in the last 5 years or so. Having owned a copy, played it to death when I was at university. It's one of those ones again. Got rid of it and then actually revisited it, like I say, about 5 years ago. Chorus by Erasure. Breath of Life, great track. Love to Hate You, clearly channeling, or should we say ripping off, I Will Survive. But Chorus, the title track, is one of Erasure's best tracks, and Am I Right was my entry point into Erasure. Chorus is, I think, it's not their best album, that's The Innocents, but it's their second best album. Chorus at number 33. Number 32, we're back with an artist who's appeared already that you may not know. This is Martin Joseph with Full Colour Black and White. This was the follow-up to his self-titled, at which point he'd been dropped by Sony. So he's now back on an independent label, and this is a predominantly acoustic album of just terrific songs. It's one of those that came out in 95, and again, I think I overplayed at the time, but I was fairly new as a Christian, and I was looking for good Christian music, and Full Colour Black and White is exactly that. So the opening track has dated horribly. It is called Going Home, and it's all about him going home to South Wales, having to cross the Severn Bridge to do it, which used to have a toll. And there's a whole thing in the story of the song that they put the toll up since I last passed this way. The toll's gone, so the song is really dated now. But then we've got Arizona Dreams, which was originally a B-side to one of the tracks off Martin Joseph. It's revisited here, it's really good. Treasure the Questions, which he'd been doing for years and had only now finally put onto an actual studio album. The Ballad of Dick Penderyn, which is often cited as his most admired song. He Never Said, which is an absolutely fantastic song. Hang the World, Give Me a River, Danny. It's a really, really good album, and it's worth your checking it out. Full Colour Black and White by Martin Joseph. And concluding this little batch, at number 31, All This Useless Beauty by Elvis Costello and the Attractions, the last Elvis and the Attractions album. All This Useless Beauty is almost an album of cover songs that the artist wrote themselves. There's a lot of songs on here that they gave away to other people. And then Elvis decided to revisit them. He was going to call the album A Case for Song. It eventually got stripped back to this title, All This Useless Beauty, and it's the first time that Elvis Costello named an album specifically after a song on there. But what a song. All This Useless Beauty is absolutely top 10 Elvis Costello songs. You Bowed Down was given away to Roger McGuinn. Why Can't a Man Stand Alone? He originally gave, I think, to Johnny Cash, who didn't record it. There's collaboration with Amy Mann on here. There's stuff he gave to June Tabor, like I Want to Vanish. It's not the last great Costello album, but it's the last great Costello album until the most recent one, which is The Boy Named If. All This Useless Beauty, my number 31. Into my top 30, and at number 30 I placed Choke by The Beautiful South. This, I think, is their best album of the 90s. It contains A Little Time and the absolutely wonderful Let Love Speak Up itself. The album hangs together fairly well and doesn't have the too many of the flaws that hit 0898 of overly nasty lyrics. Choke, number 30. At number 29, Brutal Youth by Elvis Costello. The Attractions appear on 5 or 6 of the 15 tracks on here. This was, after the Juliet Letters, viewed as being a return to form. I don't think it's quite that. It's got some ropey tracks on here. 20% Amnesia, which apparently is about the 1992 general election. It's a bit rubbish. Clown Strike is poor, but everything else is really good. So Pony Street, Kinda Murder, 13 Steps Lead Down, Sulky Girl, Favourite Hour, My Science Fiction Twin, and London's Brilliant Parade, particularly London's Brilliant Parade, belie a great album lurking in there. It's too long. If this is on vinyl, it's double, and it doesn't warrant being a double. Ditch the 2 tracks I mentioned off this album, and it is 50% better. Brutal Youth, my number 29. At number 28, I have placed Nimrod by Green Day. Another too long album. This is 3 sides of vinyl, and when it was recently re-released, that's exactly what they did. They put it on 3 sides, and the 4th side had an etching on it. It's reflective of how I think the CD age of the 90s in particular started to wreck the album format. And, well, rant over, what about the music? This could do with being trimmed to a single album. But in the first 6 tracks of the record, from Nice Guys Finished Last through to All the Time, Green Day really don't put a foot wrong. It includes Redundant and Hitching a Ride, which is apparently about falling off the wagon when you're trying to kind of cope with substance abuse. Nimrod, and Good Riddance, Time of Your Life, right at the end. It would be better as a single album rather than a 1.5 album. It would be tighter, but Nimrod, it's my favourite Green Day album of the 1990s. Nimrod at number 28. At number 27, an album that at one time I was probably being a bit of a contrarian when I said it was my favourite album by this artist. It's Fellow Hoodlums by Deacon Blue. It was a step down from When the World Knows Your Name, ultimately. But it was still a step up, in my personal view, from the Ooh Las Vegas double compilation that came out in between, which had a whole host of B-sides and things on it. Your Swaying Arms is absolutely beautiful. Cover from the Sky, a song I used to detest, but I've now grown to absolutely love, particularly when I heard him do it live on their farewell tour. James Joyce Souls is achingly lovely about the death of a GI. Day That Jackie Jumped the Jail is a bit odd. The title track's good. One Day I'll Go Walking is absolutely fantastic. Its down step is definitely Closing Time. A really crappy track, to be honest. And in all honesty, the first crappy track on a Deacon Blue album, Closing Time. And they released that as their 3rd single. Head scratch. Oh, and I forgot to mention Twist and Shout, top 10 hit. Absolutely, I really enjoyed this album whenever I put it on. Fellow Hoodlums. It's not my favourite Deacon Blue album anymore, but it's a really solid record. It's my number 27. At 26, this is the biggest casualty of this re-rank. When I originally ranked these as a top 15, I placed this at number 6. And it's tumbled 20 places. It's Flood by They Might Be Giants. I still like it. I still enjoy it when I listen to it. But maybe some of the fondness of having not listened to it properly for a while, and certainly not on vinyl, where I think it actually might be a step down from the CD for once. Flood has fallen from number 6 to 26. They Might Be Giants, Flood. At number 25 is Still Got the Blues by Gary Moore. It's not an album I've listened to for probably 5 years, and it's one I've often forgotten, but every time I play it, I'm reminded how good it is. So the title track Still Got the Blues, and there's the song that George Harrison wrote, and That Kind of Woman. Superb stuff. I forget what's on the album until it's on, and then I go, oh yes, oh and that, oh and that, oh, and it's one of those albums. As a result, it's nostalgia and my memory of how much I enjoy it that's put this in at number 25. At 24, I think this is possibly the most overrated album in this particular artist's full canon. Flaming Pie by Paul McCartney. It's another album that is too long. And I remember feeling like this at the time when it came out in 97. So as a McCartney fan, I did buy it on day of release. And there's filler on here. Now, Paul's often had filler on his records, but not to the point where it could have easily been tightened up into a single vinyl disc worth of album and massively improved as a result. So Really Love You could go, If You Wanna could go, Used to Be Bad could go. Those three out of the record, and it would be so much better. I think this is, like I say, probably Paul's most overrated release. Flaming Pie, my number 24. At 23, Heart in Motion by Amy Grant. What a beautifully lovely, happy album. And superior early 90s pop. There's nothing wrong with a really solid pop vocal album, and this is exactly what Heart in Motion is. It's my number 23. And number 22, we're sticking with the Christian artist for Third Day by Third Day. I have so many fond memories of when I first discovered this in the mid-2000s, particularly the track Love Song. It's worth its high place for Love Song alone, but Thief is great, and Consuming Fire is great, and Blackbird and Take My Life are great. Third Day had better albums in them, but not in this decade. Third Day, number 22. And number 21, the final entry on this list from this band, and one that they themselves have described as being a bit of a mess, or at least Damon Albarn did. It's The Great Escape by Blur. I massively prefer this to Parklife. It's too long, but I love country house. I love stereotypes. I love charmless man. I love Topman. I adore the Universal. I like Yuko and Hero. I like Globe Alone. I could do without Earn All Same. Like I said, Blur albums often contain something that's faintly annoying, and Hello Earn All Same with Ken Livingstone. Although his voice actually really does suit the fact that it's supposed to be a boring life, but it's the highs on here for me are better than those on both Modern Life is Rubbish and on Parklife, and the lows don't quite sink as low. As a result, I think The Great Escape, whilst it's not a 5-star album that Q gave it, is my favourite Blur album of the 90s, and it's my number 21. Into the top 20 now, and we're going to get quite a lot of albums that appeared in my top 15, but there have been some significant changes. If it was in my original top 15, I'm not going to spend long talking about it, I'm just going to quickly mention it. Number 20 was in there, it was originally my number 13, it's Twisted by Delamitri. At number 19, and this tumbled down by about 10 places, Bargainville by Moxie Fruvus. And number 18, an album that I feel like last time around I kind of forgot about, Father's House by Brian Dirksen. Now, I talked about this in my favourite Christian albums, that this was going to be a musical. Literally, they were going to turn it into a musical, and in fact they did, and it stiffed, completely stiffed, with terrible notices. There's a song on here that I had at my baptism because it actually meant that much to me, Father to Son. And a friend of mine, no longer with us, described Father's House as Vineyard Music's Sgt. Pepper. And that's actually not a bad description because it is a great song suite. Father's House at number 18. At number 17, originally number 15 on my list, Jesus Freak by DC Talk. At number 16, originally just inside the top 10 at number 10, Together Alone by Crowded House. Crowded House's best album, and for me, the best songwriting of Neil Finn. Number 15, you knew it was coming because I've already trailed it. This is Use Your Illusion 1. So, for me, this is definitely the better album. Even the album cuts are superior. Things like Coma and The Garden and Garden of Eden and Back Off B. And then there's the singles. This has got Don't Cry on it, which I think is probably the slightly better version, because there's also Don't Cry on Use Your Illusion 2. Right Next Door to Hell's absolutely fantastic. Live and Let Die. Dare I say it, just slightly better, perhaps, than Paul McCartney and Wings' version, because the attack on it's ever so slightly better. And November Rain, which on a good day will take the title of my favourite Guns N' Roses song from Sweet Child of Mine. November Rain is the guitar work in it. I adore it, and that motif at the end where Slash is playing the riff. I never get enough of it. They're so simple, but I can't get enough of it. Absolutely, really, really adore it. Use Your Illusion 1 at number 15. And number 14, I've said before, I can't get away from the fact that this is a great album, even though the people behind it I find objectionable. What's the Story, Morning Glory by Oasis. At number 13, almost exactly where it was before, 99.9 Fahrenheit Degrees by Suzanne Vega. Absolutely banging album. Number 12, tumbling down from number 4 because I haven't listened to it recently, but I know I'm going to enjoy it. Listen Without Prejudice by George Michael, the best thing he ever did by a country mile. And number 11, a new entry. A new entry into my top 15 as well as into this 50. OK Computer by Radiohead. So I've struggled with Radiohead for years. I've never got them until recently. And OK Computer, often cited as the greatest album of the 90s. I clearly don't agree. And in some cases, it's been cited as the greatest album of all time. I clearly don't agree. But it does have Paranoid Android and Exit Music for a Film and No Surprises, which my daughter has been playing on her guitar and absolutely adores. Subterranean Homesick Alien. And it's not a perfect album in my view. But it's a really good album. And it may well actually climb higher in years to come. OK Computer at number 11. Into my top 10 now, the majority of which obviously was in my top 15, but there is some changes and new entries. But at number 10, Supernatural by DC Talk. I'd originally raised this at number 5, it tumbled down a bit. At number 9, almost exactly where it was before, Innuendo by Queen. At number 8, climbing a little bit, Automatic for the People by R.E.M. At number 7, for me, his greatest album of the 1990s, Elvis Costello's Mighty Like a Rose. It's exactly where it was before. This is the only thing I think that hasn't moved in any way whatsoever. It's still my 7th best album of the 90s. At number 6, falling a little bit, Behaviour by the Pet Shop Boys. I think this is the Pet Shop Boys' strongest album. Absolutely sublime songwriting on here, and Being Boring is just wonderful. And number 5, a new entry. I toyed with this being in there the last time, and I kind of felt I would have been pandering to the masses. But then I've re-listened to it several times since I made the original video, and I thought, it's not pandering to the masses. It is phenomenal, and possibly one of the most important albums of all time, if not the 90s at least. Nevermind by Nirvana. So wrapped up in the zeitgeist of the times. This album did change music because whilst it didn't kill off heavy metal, it had a blooming good stab at it. Yes, the opening tracks, Smells Like Teen Spirit, one of the best known tracks of all time. But then Lithium, Polly, In Bloom, Territorial, Something on the Way, and it improves the more you listen to it. It's aged really well. Nevermind finds its way into my top 5. And number 4, another album that almost made it in, and I went, nah. And I think that I just went for Jesus Freaks slightly over it. Ashtung Baby by U2. Mysterious Ways, The Fly, Who's Gonna Ride Your Wild Horses, One, and my personal favourite, Until the End of the World, which is supposed to be about Judas betraying Jesus. It's Acrobat. Oh, Acrobat's fantastic. U2's greatest album. I will at some point do a U2 ranking. This will be number one by quite some distance, I think. Ashtung Baby, my number 4. Number 3, dropping from number 2, Jordan the Comeback by Prefab Sprout. And at number 2 is not a new entry. This was my number 1 album, but it's gone down one. Different Class by Pulp. It was a heart wrench when I did this ranking to think, actually, something else that wasn't even in the list is now my favourite album of the 90s. But Different Class by Pulp. What an album. Number 2. So what could have supplanted it? They've already come up, and for exactly the same reasons I did not get them until recently. The Bends by Radiohead. I had friends in the 90s who told me that this was an absolutely phenomenal album, and I didn't catch on. I owned a copy for a good 5 years, and I didn't catch on. I was driving somewhere nearly a year ago, put it on in my car, and I caught on. And it's a perfect album. I was watching a video this week of Andrew Dixon looking at his next kind of journey through his vinyl that's not Beatle related. And he said, it's a perfect album. There is not a track on here you would replace or drop. And I absolutely agree. So Fake Plastic Trees and The Bends and High and Dry and Blame It on the Black Star, Bulletproof, Street Spirit, Fade Out. The weakest track, I kind of almost agree with the podcast McCartney and Gold when they did this, might actually be My Iron Lung, because it's the closest to the Pablo Honey feel, which isn't a good album. But The Bends smashes in at the top, having not even been in my top 15 3 years ago when I first did this video. I like it so much that I kind of want to put it on right now and listen to it again. The Bends by Radiohead, number 1. So that concludes my Redux top 50 of the 1990s. As I said before, I think one of the flaws with the 90s is albums became way too long. And filler finds its way in when you think you can play with 60 minutes instead of 44. And lesser tracks start to become part, and albums become a bit more front-loaded because of the nature of a CD. For instance, I recently decided to give Life Through a Lens and I've Been Expecting You by Robbie Williams another listen. And some of the songs on I've Been Expecting You are phenomenal. The first 4 or 5 songs are just fantastic. And then the second half of the album takes a bit of a dip. It's sad that so many 90s albums became hour long. It's too much. I don't think the human attention span is really made for that. I think we are hardwired for a 20-minute experience before we have to do something physically, like get up and change a record. Thankfully, we seem to be heading back that way now, with artists releasing albums that are much more focused. As a result, there are many albums from the 2020s that are already becoming solid cast iron favourites with me. I had a go recently, just from the first 4 years of the 2020s, on a top 50, and it wasn't as much of a stretch as you might have imagined. So that concludes the video. Please remember to subscribe, like, and hit the bell. Tell someone else about the channel if you've enjoyed this. I will be back soon with another video, but until then, thanks for watching.